Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Back in 2019, I, an 18-year-old female, decided to download Tinder a few months after a rough breakup. I was very inexperienced with dating and pretty shy, so it seemed unlikely that I would meet a potential partner in person. Anyway, after a few matches that led to nothing, I came across the profile of someone that I found very attractive. He was 21 years old and male. We matched, exchanged Snapchats, and continued to set up a date. Our first date was relatively normal and enjoyable. We saw a movie, and by the end of it, I felt like we hit it off. However, our relationship was extremely short-lived. Not long after I had agreed to be his girlfriend, after about a month of going out, he began to behave very erratically and would sometimes fall completely silent in the middle of a conversation, ignoring me when I tried to ask him what was wrong. He became hot-tempered, slamming doors and speeding on the road when he got mad, and I started to feel really uncomfortable about our relationship. This went on for about a few weeks until one night, when we were on our way to have dinner downtown. He fell silent mid-conversation. I became extremely anxious as he pulled into a nearby parking garage, wondering what I had done to upset him. And as we parked, I decided to ask him what was wrong. He did not answer, and when I asked him again, he shouted at me to shut the hell up. I was completely frozen for a moment, but I finally got up the courage to tell him that we were done, gather my belongings from the car, and I walked over to the nearest coffee shop to call an Uber. It was fairly late that night, so I walked as fast as I could, hoping that he wouldn't follow me. When I made it to the shop, I noticed that I had several missed calls from him. And when I made it home that night, I blocked him on all social media and decided to never contact him again. I am fairly familiar with the dynamic of toxic relationships, and I knew that if he could talk to me that way, completely unprompted, it was likely that he was capable of much, much more. About a week goes by as I start to settle my emotions a bit. I decided to confide in a friend who had never met a guy about what happened, feeling completely embarrassed. And a few nights later, I received a text from the same friend. It was a screenshot of an Instagram DM from someone she didn't follow. It was from my now ex. It said something to the effect of, "Hey, I'm sorry if we're having to meet like this, but your friend is ignoring me and I need to talk to her." My heart sunk. I decided to message all of my friends separately and let them know what happened just in case. And later that week, I start receiving several DMs from various accounts, all without profile pictures or posts. And eventually I gave in and I responded to one, asserting that the relationship was over and that I didn't want to hear from him ever again. I blocked the accounts immediately afterwards. As time went on without hearing a word in weeks, I figured that I had reached the end of the situation. Until one morning while I walked to my car, I noticed something dangling around the handle of my car door. It was a necklace I gave him. He had only picked me up once from my house before. The thought of him driving to my house earlier that night freaked me out. I was shaken up for a while. It was by no means an expensive necklace, and I had the exact same one. But I kept it pushing. I thought maybe it was his way of acknowledging that we were done. And 2 months later, I was working my job at a small boutique near my house. I was used to answering the phone several times a day, so when the phone rang, I thought nothing of it. But when I picked up, I immediately recognized his voice. He started rambling about wanting his sweatshirt back, but I hung up before he could finish. That was the last time that I would ever tell someone I was dating where I worked. I was completely losing it at this point, especially considering that he had never called me at work while we were together. I didn't even know how he knew that I was working that day or time. I told my older sister the situation, and she, being very protective, decided to message him herself. She told him to leave me alone and even offered to give him back the sweatshirt for me. He refused and insisted on meeting up with me in person to get it. And when it became clear that he didn't actually want the sweatshirt back, she threatened him with a PPO, to which he never responded. And that was the last time that I had heard from him. We've all had bad dates, right? Well, this is the only date that I've had to date that rang every alarm bell and waved every red flag. I'll preface this by saying that I don't go on many dates, but when I do, I make sure that I follow safety protocol by only meeting my date in public places, let either my family or friends know where I'm going, and park in a populated place close by to wherever we meet. Anyway, this date initially suggested that we meet at his house to watch a movie and have a few drinks, and I said no, that I don't feel comfortable with that and I only want to meet in public. He seemed okay with this, but then brought it up a few more times, and I said, if money is an issue, we could meet up another time, or forget about it altogether. But my date backtracked and went with my idea of meeting at a cafe that I chose. It was a place that I was familiar with, and equidistant to where we both lived. Anyway, he turns up in a 2-door car, which this detail will be relevant later, and then goes into the cafe, and I follow behind and introduce myself. And after a polite introduction, things began to get weird. I order a Coke and he says, "Don't you want a drink? I was going to pop into the bar and get one," which the bar is connected to the cafe. I say no, that I'm not drinking, and then he looks at me like as if I was being unreasonable. I already explained in messages that I don't drink as I'm on medication, so having to re-explain it again pissed me off. He seems disappointed and goes to order a cider from the bar while I get a table. Anyway, we sit down with our drinks and my date immediately goes on about going back to his place again, even though the original plan was to stay here and order food, and I already stated that that was not happening. He says something along the lines of having a few drinks and eating at his place, and I said we don't have to eat, we can just have our drinks and leave. He gets defensive and says he has the money, but prefers it if we go back to his. I make a joke and say, "You're not a killer, are you?" And instead of laughing it off, he stares at me uncannily and says, "You don't think I would hurt you, do you?" I laugh uncomfortably and say of course not, but really, I'm relieved this date won't be going any further. My date suddenly says, "Are you going to follow me in your car? Because that wouldn't make sense. How about we go in my car, but I've got packages in front, so you'll have to squeeze in the back and I'll drop you back off to your car after." In reality, that made less sense than me following in his car and driving home from his house. The fact that it was completely illogical made it even more creepy in my mind. Every alarm bell was going off at this point, and I said, "Look, I don't want to go to yours, and your insistence is giving me the creeps." My date looked shocked, mumbles something about needing the toilet, and excuses himself from the table. And a few moments later, I see him through the cafe window getting into his car and then driving off. Massive bullet dodged in my opinion. Also, the fact that his car didn't have back doors made it even more sinister, because imagine if something happened in the car and I couldn't escape. So this didn't happen to me, but a friend of a friend. She told me that her friend had met a guy on Tinder from another city whom she had been texting for a little while. They had planned to meet up at her apartment one night, and the whole time he was there, she got a really weird and creepy vibe from him. He would make morbid jokes and tease or flirt with her in a super creepy way, like telling her that he loved her tits, but they would be much bigger, and therefore hotter if she was 200 pounds heavier. And when it was time to go, he seemed very reluctant to leave and asked if he could stay, but she refused and he finally left. Half an hour later, however, he was back at her front door asking if he could spend the night at her place because he had missed his train, and she reluctantly agreed to let him sleep on the couch for that night. But when she went to bed, she made sure to lock her bedroom door. At some point in the night, she heard strange sounds and him creeping through her apartment. A few moments later, he was knocking on her door saying that he needed help with something, but her gut feeling told her not to open the door, so she stayed put. When morning came, she cautiously left her room and looked through her apartment. He was gone apparently, but she discovered that her bathroom was entirely covered in foil. Always make sure to trust your gut and meet your Tinder dates in a public place. If it's the first time, guys, you can't really gauge what a person is like just from texting them. This happened a few years ago. I, a 20-year-old female, had just gotten into the Tinder scene and was pretty new to the whole thing. One of the first matches I had was with a guy named Zach. Not his actual name. Zach seemed super cool, and we messaged back and forth on the platform about video games, anime, and generic other things in our lives for about a week. Finally, Zach asked if we could meet up. I figured enough time had gone by and he hadn't given out any red flags, so I said yes. We set a date for the next day, and I made my first big mistake. I gave him my address to pick me up. Looking back on this now, I realize how stupid I was to do that, and things could have gone a lot worse when they did. The next day comes, and I spend much of my morning nervously getting ready for my first real Tinder date. Thankfully, my roommate Sarah, also not her real name, was home with me and experienced the whole ordeal. About 30 minutes before Zach was supposed to pick me up, Sarah and I watched 2 cars pull up in front of our 4-unit apartment building. 3 of these redneck-looking creepy countrymen get out, and they looked to be about 40, so Sarah and I paid them no mind. The next thing we know, we hear a loud banging on the main door. Our building is locked unless you are a tenant, so they clearly didn't belong. Me, being as naive as I am, thought that they were there for one of the other building residents, and I stupidly opened the door to ask him who they were looking for. The guy in the middle said, "We're here for," and they mentioned my name. At that moment, I went from friendly to confused to scared. I didn't like the way that they were looking at me. I told them that I was the one that they were looking for, which was my third mistake. And he gave me the creepiest smile, came over and said, "Oh, yes, you look like your pictures." This sent a chill down my spine, and I demanded to know who they were and what they wanted. The guy in the middle said that they were friends of Zach and that they were here to pick me up for our date. I asked him where Zach was, and he snickered and said, "He's in the car," and pointed to the second car, which was strategically parked behind a tree, so I couldn't see if Zach was actually in there or not. Luckily, I'm not that stupid. I told them that if Zach wanted me to go out to the car, then he could come get me himself. Then the guy on the right steps up and asks if I would like to get with him. I went to shut the door, but he shoved his boot into the frame before I could completely close it. The man on the right then said, "If you won't fuck me, then fuck my buddies at least." At that moment, Sarah comes out to the lobby, yanks me into our apartment and locks the door. They banged on the door for a few minutes and Sarah calls the cops. They left shortly after, and we watched them from the living room window as they got back into the cars and drove away. There was nobody else in the car. What's even worse is a couple hours later, I got a message from Zach saying, "I am so sorry. My friends took my phone and thought they would play a prank on me. Don't worry, you will see I'm a great guy when we actually meet." I blocked him instantly and deleted my Tinder. The cops couldn't do anything because I didn't get their names or license plates. So, I never did find out what happened to those guys. I just need to type this story out because it's still so unbelievably surreal to me that I can't even believe it's real. I'm not sure if this is the right sub to be posting this, but hopefully it applies. And apologies in advance because this will probably get long. So last fall, I started using dating apps seriously because I really wanted to branch out and meet new guys. I moved back home after I graduated college in May, which was still the pretty early stages of COVID, so I was lonely. I've only ever used Tinder, so my friend told me that I should try Bumble. And at first, it was fun. I matched with a few guys and there were nice ones, but the convos kinda died after a while, and I didn't really form a real connection with anyone on there. One of the guys I matched with asked for my Snapchat, which I gave to him so we could talk on there, and we also followed each other on Instagram. That kind of stuff is harmless to me, and I really don't think much of it. Our convos didn't last long, and we stopped talking after just a few days. He was a little strange, and I was turned off by it. And fast forward a couple of months, and I get a message from him on Instagram. He told me that he had unfollowed me because of my support of Joe Biden in the election, and then proceeded to spam me with probably over 40 messages trying to convince me to change my views and vote for Trump. I'm a very liberal person, and if I would have known he was like this, I would have never spoken to him. He kept telling me people have blocked him for doing this before and to please just understand where he's coming from. His last few messages were memes to ease the tension of the one-sided convo. He and I never talked long enough for him to feel comfortable messaging me like this. I didn't respond. I didn't even block him. I opened the messages so he could see that I saw them, and then I unfollowed him. The next morning, I got notifications telling me, "This message has been unsent by the sender." For every single message. Of course, I screen recorded it and sent it to my friend to tell her what happened because it was creepy and bizarre. It was over after that though, and the topic of this guy didn't come up again, so I moved on. A few weeks ago, I was scrolling through Facebook and I saw a post from a local news station that was shared from the town this guy was from in my state that's about an hour away from me. It was a news article about a guy who shot and killed an 87-year-old woman who lived in his apartment complex with a semi-automatic rifle. He was trying to get other residents out of their apartments until he was shot and killed as well by a resident in order to protect the others who lived there. And as I was reading about this, the guy's name and face seemed so familiar, and then it clicked. It was the same guy. I went back to the screen recording of the messages that I took months ago, and they confirmed it was him. I'm not sure how to describe what my response was, but I got really sweaty and my heart was racing when I made the realization. It's extremely disturbing knowing that I spoke to this man and even had a weird experience with him. It's been a few weeks since I found out, and I still feel weird about it. I was just reading about it again today since more details have been reported since the initial shooting. Sometimes, I think about the what-ifs. Like, what if I had responded to his messages the way I wanted to and called him a creep and weirdo and pissed him off to the point of violence and he tried to harm me? God, I hope the woman that he unfairly murdered is resting in eternal peace. Thank you for listening if you made it this far, and be wary of people on dating apps. This happened last year during my student exchange in France. This was probably only 2 weeks before COVID imploded and I had to head back to my home country. That night, there was a language exchange at a bar maybe 30 minutes away from me on the subway. My roommate didn't seem interested in going, so I decided to make this my first night out alone as I had already talked to the organizers of the event, and they seemed nice. Plus, the subway in Paris on Fridays closes at around 1:30 a.m., so I knew I had time to go, meet people, and go home relatively safely. I got there maybe half an hour late, got my little flag stickers that indicated the languages I spoke, and I headed into the crowd to try to talk to people. Everything was pleasant. I made friends with a group of guys, and we made good small talk for a solid hour. After a while, the group decided to split and try to find others to actually exchange languages with, since we were all speaking English at this point. I headed over to the bar to get myself a drink, where a group of what I can only describe as chavs, but French, started annoying me about the flag on my shirt. A Chilean flag. They threw everything out there. "Is it in Africa? Oh, is it in Colombia?" At first, I didn't mind correcting them, but it got old pretty quick after I realized that they were just messing around. I left them to it and started talking to an older man by the bar who seemed nice enough, and after talking to him for about 30 minutes he heads off. And that's when the creepy encounter started. A random guy, mid-20s, early 30s, shows up next to me on the bar and starts making conversation by saying, "Oh, I knew immediately where your flag was from." I just smiled at him, then he started the, "Oh, you're very beautiful," that kind of talk. Look, as a 21-year-old woman, This isn't my first time in this situation. Usually if men aren't being overtly creepy, I'll just smile. Maybe give a conversation and try, and if they keep pushing, I just go. I said thanks and I kept nursing my drink, hoping that he caught the sign that I wasn't trying to talk. He kept asking me about where I was from, why I was here, where I was staying, to which I gave very vague short answers. And out of nowhere, and I really mean out of absolutely nowhere, he says something along the lines of, "I'm in love with you." Dude, what? I've directed maybe 20 words in total to this man, and I'm getting a full love confession? I let out a laugh that was half nerves and half "are you kidding me?" At this point, he's forcing eye contact, and I mean really intense eye contact. I tried everything. I'm not interested, I'm in a relationship, and I even headed towards my last resort, which is saying that I'm a lesbian, which is true, but he would not budge. He said, "Oh, I respect that. Yes, it's not your fault." And he meant that it's not my fault that I'm a lesbian. And he kept going with what I would consider to be the creepiest part. "I want to do romantic things with you." Excuse me? You what? This set me off on the negative gut feeling. It's one of those phrases that is just off enough that your brain goes, "Huh?" Not a dinner, not a date, not something, just romantic things. Well, I wasn't about to find out what that meant, and I put on my full bitch face going, "Look, I know you maybe are just trying to be nice, but I'm not interested, and I'm in a committed relationship to a woman." I got up, and he tried to touch my arm, to which I immediately flinched and shot daggers at him. "I just think you're beautiful. I want to marry you someday, maybe have kids. You have beautiful eyes." Thankfully, the bar had cleared out some, and I was able to cross the floor and grab my parka. He kept saying things behind me, saying, "I just want to try romantic things." I grabbed a random non-creepy man that I had talked to that night who was just leaving, and I said, "Are you walking to the subway?" And I went with him. My recently professed suitor followed us. I remembered him perfectly, wearing a tan waterproof jacket, standing right outside the bar door looking at me. The guy I was walking with was going in the complete opposite direction of the subway line, but I wasn't about to risk going down to my own line alone and waiting. Most train stations have an option to switch directions if you mess up without paying again, so I figured that I'd go down with my bodyguard of sorts, making him stand with me near the direction change, and if I saw the creep coming, I'd book it and pray a car came in time. But it was just my luck that that specific station was undergoing repairs, and it was either get your direction right on the first try or perish. No direction change in sight. So I did what I, in my 2 mojito fight or flight mode, had to do. I ran back up the stairs and tried to pay again, except the card I used was one of those cards that once you scan, you can't use it again in at least 5 minutes, and I wasn't going to wait that long, and I could hear someone coming down the subway stairs. Paris subway has turnstiles, but it also has doors that only open once you scan. So, I sucked in my breath as much as I could, went under the turnstile, and squeezed through the tiny space between the door. I have no idea how I made past it with my parka on. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. I had just managed to make it downstairs when the train was arriving. But as I turned around, I saw him on the sort of bridge area overlooking the train tracks. I managed to growl at my biggest, meanest no. He said something like, "I want to grow old with you, give me your number," or something of that sort. And the train doors opened, and I walked inside backwards, making eye contact and saying no again. Luckily, that's just about one of the most universal words out there. I'm thankful to the Friday night 1 a.m. Paris subway crowd. They all seemed confused, but they had the right spirit, and a couple of girls waved me over so I could stand with them until the door closed. And they went with me until I had to change lines. Let me tell you, I felt safer on the 2-minute walk from the subway to my apartment than near that guy. And my neighborhood was kinda known for being a big crack hotspot. At least, the crackheads left me alone. So, if anyone takes something away from this, just be freaking mean. Be rude as hell. I tried being mean a little too late and got one of the creepiest love confessions of my life. A stalker into the subway and a story to tell on here. And here are the top comments for my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.